Hello and welcome to PEP, which stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance, where I talk to my guests about what put a PEP in their step, in other words, what's empowered them, and how they've had a career that has put a PEP in other people's steps, in other words, how they have inspired others. And I'm joined today by Charlin Caster. She is a communication and knowledge management professional supporting USAID, which is the United States Aid Agency, learning projects. Currently working in the gender and youth practice at Banyan Global, a development consulting firm that works in 5 continents. Charlin is helping to facilitate a women's economic empowerment community of practice. This community of practice works to advance global gender equality and promote women's access to employment opportunities. Previously, she worked at Training Resources Group, managing marketlinks.org, an economic growth learning platform under USAID, Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment. Charlin has also supported USAID's Feed the Future program and Global Health Fellows. Charlin has experience with facilitation, event planning, project management, leading internal engagement, and communication consultancies. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks for the warm introduction.
Of course. So to kick things off, I just asked my guests what sparked their passion for sort of the work that they do. So in your international development work, what got the ball rolling for you in terms of that passion?
I would say that long before I was working in work that was internationally focused, I was starting to travel a bit internationally and learning more and more through talking to people, seeing different documentaries, and it really just sparked my curiosity first about intercultural communication and how the United States and other countries had just various types of relationships. And then from there, I met actually a foreign service officer, and she was telling me more and more about her work. And that kind of started the research bug for me. And then I learned more about international development and all about that world, and ended up going to school for conflict resolution, peace and conflict resolution, but had a bit of a focus on understanding how to support women. And so that's kind of what led me to the project I'm working on now.
Yeah, and can you tell me what you're learning in your current work, in your current role, what that looks like?
Sure. So I'm learning a ton about women's economic empowerment. I'm learning about gender inequality and some of the systemic ways that women just are not playing at the same forefront, not just in this country, but internationally as well. And some of that has a lot to do with the types of societal norms that people are facing, and just learning how those things present themselves. So I'm doing a ton of research from different webinars, different books, and there's so much documentation out there, as well as USAID has many guides and resources available. So I'm digging into all of that and learning more about the subject matter.
Yeah, by way of context, what exactly is a community of practice? Like, what does that look like and what does that mean?
Sure. So community of practice is kind of a broad term. You could even think of community of practice as like a grad school cohort. So a group of people that are working and learning together on a specific subject. So if I had to liken it to something else, I might say even a book club could almost be considered a community of practice if they're coming together to discuss a certain topic and diving deeper into that. And so in this context, a community of practice are professionals that work on projects on international or on women's economic empowerment. And they are coming together to just talk about the successes and challenges that they're facing in their projects.
Okay, got it. And that ties back beautifully to the passion that you mentioned, which is this curiosity, right? And that sounds like it's a built-in way of you staying curious and using your curiosity in your work. So that's great that is built in there. You mentioned the that women's empowerment is sort of at the heart of the current projects that you're working on. And I'm interested in this question of empowerment. In my coaching practice, I focus on empowering people's passion, their purpose, and their perseverance. And I'm going to talk to you more about those specific lenses. So when you think about economic empowerment or gender empowerment more broadly, what does that mean for you? What does empowerment look like?
For me, it means that women are presented with the same opportunities that men are, and that they have the agency to explore different career paths, and that they are also able to excel in the workplace, get promoted, that their marital status does not in any way influence their employment opportunities or whether or not they have children, and that they can seek out careers that maybe have not been traditionally available to them. So that's what that means for me.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would add about, as I said, I focus on passion, purpose, and perseverance. Are there any other lenses or ways of thinking about empowerment that you find particularly helpful?
Well, I would just say that everything should come down to choice. So just as I think it's important for women to have opportunities available to them that they traditionally should not or have not have, I think it's also important to recognize and cultivate women that aspire to have career choices that are traditionally held by women. So even if that means they're not participating in the formal workforce, but helping out at home and taking care of the household, I think those choices should really just be celebrated, and that obstacles are not in the way just based on someone's sex.
Okay, got it. So it's have a combination of sort of both fostering and cultivating agency, and then making sure there's an equitable space for that agency to be sort of manifested.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah, a lot of the work I do around coaching is working with people who, for whatever reason, are stuck or they're not able to exercise their agency, or maybe they don't know what it is they want, or they're in a workspace where that culture doesn't exist. So that's great. Yeah, so in the work that you've done in terms of supporting international development projects, what are some important lessons that you have learned?
I have learned and I'm still learning to listen, and to listen to the people that are directly affected by some of the programs. I've had an opportunity to read several resources and textbooks, but I've also had opportunities to learn from people that maybe grew up in conflict zones, or grew up in, famine, and just hearing their experiences always has taught me so much more. And so I've thankfully had that opportunity before graduate school and graduate school. And in my work, sometimes you can read different stories and different accounts from people. And I would say that's really the most important thing. And it's also critical just to view things from that person's perspective, and kind of having a human-centered design approach, not just telling people what you think that they need. So that's a form of capacity building as I see it, and just a form of just really centering and focusing on the people that the programs are affecting.
Okay. Are there specific tools for that human-centered approach that are utilized in the work that you do?
Well, in my specific role, which is knowledge management, digital learning, and communications, I'm not necessarily implementing these tools, but I know that the development practitioners are, and I really can't name those specifically though.
Sure. But as a way of being centered around the people that most are in need of the services.
Right. And I know that there's a lot of, there are analyses that are done to make sure that people are understanding what needs to take place, and not just applying like a one size fits all method, but kind of like doing a needs assessment and understanding, and then working backwards from there, or working forward from there.
Got it. Thank you. Um, as I said, a lot of the coaching that I do for my work is about empowering both managers and their teams. So I work with clients both individually or collectively. What are some important lessons that you've learned about keys to healthy and effective work culture in your career, especially given that you work doing international development projects that probably require cross-cultural understanding and teamwork? You mentioned it, I asked about passion. You mentioned the importance of cross-cultural communication. What are some, yeah, can you just sort of talk about the challenges of that, and also what you've learned in working through cross-cultural divides or differences?
Sure. So for the most part, I'm 100% based in the U.S. I would say that just on like a very simple, very simple trick that I've pulled is that when we have some of our virtual events and they're worldwide, it's easy for me to say, "Good morning, everyone," not taking into account that there might be someone joining from Southeast Asia and it's nighttime for them. So just being aware of that, or being mindful in communications, especially to include the time zone, because you can't take for granted that everyone's on the East Coast. And then beyond that, when I have had the opportunity to travel to different parts of the world for work, it's just being mindful of my how I'm gesturing when talking to people, or what the local customs might be, making sure I'm not being offensive in any way, or even just understanding it in some parts of the world. Time may be more of not as a hard, fast rule. So, just it's all about adapting and just kind of rolling with the punches.
Thank you. I guess can ask that, I guess, in maybe contexts that are more specific to the work that you do. Can you speak, I guess, broadly about the importance of creating healthy relationships and healthy work cultures in the work that you do?
Sure. So I would say that it's really just important to be authentic and to seek out authentic spaces to work in. And you know, I've experienced different uh, different parts of the spectrum on that. So just trying to be 100% honest about maybe your skill level or your background level that you're bringing into a position, and asking important questions about culture and about expectations, and hoping that the people that you're working with and working for are communicating that back to you, so that you can just have a really healthy relationship.
Okay, so it ties back to, you said earlier, one of the things you're working a lot on, being intentional about, is listening. And so communication is super important, which I appreciate, because a lot of my coaching is just about even before getting to the goals and getting to the deep stuff, a lot of it is just coaching around communication. Never mind solving the actual issues and stuff like that, but a lot of my work is communication centered, so it's important. Thank you. As mentioned at the start, I focus on perseverance, both at the individual and institutional or organizational level. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this interview is taking place during a global pandemic. I know you also have some work that involves public health fellowship, and so I want to ask you about, sort of in the global context, there's a lot of need for perseverance because we're faced with unique challenges. Can you just speak to how COVID has changed the needs of those you serve in your current work at Banyan Capital, and how you and others at work have adapted to those challenges or those changes?
Sure. So just one tiny correction. I'm at Banyan Global, and actually started with Banyan during the pandemic.
Mhm.
So um, I am 100% remote, and always have been. But just to, rewind a little bit, right before we started quarantining, I was actually supposed to, in my previous position, go to South Africa. My
Mm.
ticket was booked, and I was starting to prepare for that. The hotel was booked, and then when everyone started quarantining, the conference that I was attending was canceled. My flight was canceled. And it was more important that not only to quarantine, but also not to go to South Africa, to a country that may not have the infrastructure to handle a widespread, a pandemic. And so what I've seen is a lot of travel has been halted, and it's not just to keep, the people that are traveling safe, but just to keep those people there in those countries safe. There are some people that do still travel for work, and it's kind of on a emergency basis. All the precautions are taken and are necessary, but in the spirit of do no harm, it just wouldn't be responsible to keep sending people out on the ground if they're not also able to handle the repercussions of that.
And programmatically, in terms of like the work, in terms of empowering women in economic development and other priorities that Banyan Global has as it relates to USAID work, can you comment on maybe ways that's challenged, like specifics of like programs having this pandemic and creating maybe perhaps even additional need for folks?
Sure. So, of course, women have been hit hardest by this pandemic, and the outlook for women in the workforce around the world and in the United States is really awful right now. Women are having to leave the workforce and don't have as much likelihood to return as men at this current state. In my specific project supporting the community practice, we have definitely heard that understanding resources around adapting to COVID-19 is, I would say, one of the number one pieces of information that people are seeking. And since we're still in the middle of this, everything's being adapted real time. But Banyan Global has put out a lot of resources around COVID-19, and I know they're being widely used.
Good. Great. Can you talk about, so the topic that I'm sort of on at this point is perseverance. Can you talk about maybe roles that perseverance has played throughout your career or even at a personal level and what it means to you?
Sure. So, even just the process of attending graduate school requires a lot of perseverance, or afterwards looking for a job, finding the right fit in a job. That takes a lot of perseverance. And I would say that throughout my career, which just kind of changed a little bit. When I first finished undergrad, I was focused on event planning. And then I was working, doing an internship here or a job there before I really found my footing, or at least my footing as it is now. And that just takes being resilient, being open-minded, and being open to change.
Okay. When you say open to change, can you tell me a little bit more about sort of what change has looked like for you and what you've gotten out of that change?
Sure. So by being open to change, I just mean that sometimes, what you might think or what you're expecting may not be actually what you get, and you have to just kind of roll with that and make the most of it. So I've, I can't think of any specific examples or short examples off the top of my head, but it's definitely something I've had to just, embrace the spirit of.
Gotcha. Yeah. When I talk to people about that, I as I sort of mentioned, the last sort of pillar of things that I focus on in coaching are purpose, right? And so the idea is you might have short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, but things happen and it knocks you off of those things. But if you have a purpose, like a North Star that you're guiding towards, you can find work and you can adapt to change. So thinking back on going from event planning to the work you do now and sort of the scenario you described, What would you say is would be your overall sort of purpose as it relates to your work, and even outside of work, just your general life purpose?
Sure. I mean, that's a really lofty question, but
Yeah.
I would say um, I something that just drives me is understanding people and understanding how systems can shape the lives of people and just different ways to mitigate and address that. So that could, I'm really interested in educational systems. I'm interested in, country level systems. There's so many different ways that people are just impacted, and things are not just like a matter of luck. And so the more I learn about these topics, it just kind of drives me to see what can I do to help, or what can I do to even understand more.
Okay. And that connects, so it's sort of a combination of the people-centered work that you talked about earlier, but also this overlying umbrella of curiosity, and then that connects for you to like, kind of create that.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Good. So I started off talking about the PEP in terms of empowerment. We sort of started a conversation about empowerment. What do you feel like has empowered you to be successful in your career?
Sure. So I think it's a combination of being determined and patient, and having some really key champions that have, been mentors or connectors for me. Really just a combination of that. So I've had some people that have been really instrumental in helping me meet the right people, which has led to the right interview, which has led to the next job. And I've also been really diligent about, looking for opportunities. One example that comes to mind, when I was at the tail end of graduate school, I learned about this career fair, but it was geared towards professionals that had more experience than I had at the time. And there was a pretty hefty price to attend. And so I didn't have the experience, and I also didn't have the money. So I wrote to the conference and asked if I could be a volunteer to help, hand out pamphlets and tell people how to go to the bathroom. And I was able to volunteer, and volunteers got 1 hour to network. And so I brought a change of clothes and changed out of the bright neon t-shirt that said volunteer, and had, my professional clothes on, and I walked around and networked. And that did end up leading to a job.
That's very resourceful. Yeah, no, that's creative. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's interesting. Good. So part of that is you that goes back to the idea of agency, right? You empower yourself. You said, okay, they set some upper limits, they set some boundaries, but I'm going to break through those boundaries in the hour I have to do it. So that's awesome. What keeps you motivated?
Uh, I would say a sense of not quite feeling done yet, not feeling like I um, am at the level of expertise I'd like to be at, or the level of experience, and just that there's so much out there that I don't know. And that just motivates me to keep going, and to keep exploring, and to keep being curious.
Awesome. What advice or piece of advice would you give to somebody else who's interested in starting a career in international development?
Sure. So I would say the first thing that they should do is maybe figure out um, a way to specify their interest. So if it's a regional interest, or a topical interest, or if it's an interest around a particular skill. So for instance, my contribution to the international development world has been knowledge management and communications, and also facilitating digital learning too. And so understanding maybe how your particular skills can be of service to international development, or what exactly you want to learn more about. So, that could be climate, that could be on a specific group of people. It could be, like I said, regionally focused. It could be about health. So figuring that out, and then figuring out who are the key players and organizations in those spaces, learning as much from them as you can, and also figuring out what's missing. What are they not talking about? What areas are they not exploring? Like, what's the one thing that maybe, you're not hearing anybody talking about, but maybe you're interested in it, and then trying to carve out your path in that space. Maybe that you've just, chanced upon a new area of research or something that needs to be better understood. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. Thank you. As we think about this conversation, your career and your passions and the work that you've done, is there anything that we haven't talked about? Anything burning that you want to say? Or anything I didn't ask you about that was a point of interest for you?
Well, just something I would say is, as I am, still very much a novice in my career, even though I've been working for quite a while now, but I still feel like I'm at the beginning of the game. That I'm really just interested to see how this field looks in 10 to 20 years, and what advancements have been made, if the same programs exist, or what kind of indicators will tell us, where success has been made. And I'm really interested to see how the pandemic shapes everything. And I mean that on a very broad and global level, on a domestic level, how different communities are affected, students not being in school. I'm really, really interested and hopeful that we are uncovering and being intentional and mindful about what the pandemic is doing, that we can steer things. But I really just need to see. And that's something that is like, if I could fast forward a few years in advance and look back, that's something I would love to know.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.